In the autumn of 1347, a ship emerged from the fog in the harbor of Messina in Sicily. From the outside, it was just another Genoese trading galley. But aboard it traveled something that would kill, within a few short years, between a third and half of all of Europe. No army, no weapons, no warning. This is the story of the Black Death, the greatest catastrophe in human history. To grasp the scale of it, go back a little in time. Around the year 1340, Europe was a continent brimming with life. Walled cities, cathedrals, noisy markets, peasants working the fields. Its population had been growing for centuries. No one, absolutely no one, imagined they were living through the final years of an entire world. The story doesn't begin in Europe. It begins far away, on the steppes of Central Asia. And it begins because of a network of roads, the Silk Road. For centuries, it carried silk, spices, and gold between China and the Mediterranean. But alongside the caravans, without anyone knowing, something else was traveling too, a bacterium. Its name we would only discover 6 centuries later, Yersinia pestis. It lived in silence among the wild rodents of the steppe, carried from host to host by fleas. For a long time, it stayed confined to that corner of the world. But trade was growing, and trade, without meaning to, had built a perfect road for the disease to travel. The mechanism was simple and cruel. A flea would bite an infected rodent, then bite another animal, then a human being. The bacterium passed from one body to the next in silence. In an age with no known microbes, no hygiene, no notion of contagion, it was the perfect setting. Nature had set a trap, and humanity was walking straight into it. In the trading posts of Central Asia, merchants exchanged silks and spices with no idea what they carried. Every caravan that set out toward the west carried that invisible passenger a little farther. Year after year, mile after mile, the disease drew closer to the great cities of the known world. In 1346, it reached the Black Sea, and it arrived at an explosive moment. The port city of Caffa, in Crimea, today in Ukraine, was under siege by a Mongol army. Inside the walls, Genoese merchants held out against the assault. Outside, the enemy army began to sicken and die from a strange disease, swift and merciless. And then came one of the darkest episodes in military history. According to accounts from the time, the Mongols, dying by the thousands, decided to turn the disease itself into a weapon. They loaded their catapults with the bodies of their own dead and hurled them over the walls of Caffa. It is considered one of the first recorded cases of biological warfare in history. Terrified, the Genoese merchants did the only thing they knew how to do. They fled. They boarded their ships and sailed from Caffa toward home, crossing the Mediterranean back to Italy. They didn't know it was already too late. The disease was aboard, hidden in the rats, in the fleas, in the clothing, in the holds. Every ship had become a floating time bomb. October 1347. The Genoese galleys reached Messina, in Sicily, wrapped in the same cold mist. The people at the port went out to meet the ships, as they always did, and they found entire crews sick or already dead. In that instant, without anyone realizing it, the Black Death had just come ashore in Europe. The authorities of Messina understood quickly that something was terribly wrong. They tried to drive the ships away, to force them out of the harbor. But it was useless. The rats had already climbed down the mooring ropes. The disease was already in the city. And from Sicily, it now looked out upon an entire continent. Open, defenseless, spread out before it. That was how the plague came in. Not by an army, not by an invasion. By a crate of goods unloaded on a dock. By a rat climbing down from a ship. The greatest force nature ever turned against humanity did not arrive with a roar. It arrived in silence, hidden in the most ordinary thing in the world, trade between people. And once it was on land, it never stopped. Through the winter of 1347 into 1348, the Black Death spread across Italy like a dark shadow creeping over the map. Every new city it reached became a fresh outbreak, and the speed was terrifying. Within a matter of months, it was already threatening the greatest cities in Europe. This is a real illustration from the period, showing the burial of plague victims in a 14th century European city. Notice that it isn't horror for its own sake. It's a record. Ordinary people digging graves for their neighbors, day after day, until there were no hands left to dig. It was like this everywhere, all at once. It reached Florence, one of the richest and most cultured cities in Europe. And Florence fell silent. The streets, once full of merchants and musicians, emptied. The windows were shut. The only sound left was a distant bell, tolling for the dead. A city that had teemed with life suddenly looked abandoned. On the doors of houses where the disease had entered, people began to paint a cross. It was a warning, do not enter. Entire cities barred their gates, trying to keep out anyone from the outside. No one knew how the disease spread, so they tried everything. But the cross on the door, more often than not, came too late. Those who could fled. Entire families left the cities and climbed into the hills and out to the countryside, carrying what little they could. They believed that far from the crowds, they would be safe. Sometimes they were. Often, without knowing it, they carried the disease with them in their very clothes. Flight, which seemed like salvation, became one more way to spread the plague. In Florence, one man watched it all with a writer's eyes. His name was Giovanni Boccaccio. As death took the city, he began to write. And out of that grief was born one of the greatest works of world literature, the Decameron. Proof that even in the worst of moments, humanity insists on creating beauty. The idea behind Boccaccio's book is brilliant and revealing. He imagines 10 young Florentines who flee the plague and take refuge in a villa in the countryside. To keep from going mad with fear, they agree on one thing. Each will tell a story a day for 10 days. 100 stories to hold death at bay with the force of imagination. It was fiction born from the end of the world. And the numbers of that end of the world are hard to believe. In some churches in Italy, records survive of 700 people buried in a single month. Cities lost half their population in weeks. This was not a disease that killed a few. It was a disease that emptied the world, pew by pew, house by house. From Italy, the plague crossed the Alps. It descended through the snowbound valleys toward France, carried by the merchant caravans that were still trying to carry on with life. And it struck the city that, in that moment, was the beating heart of religious power in Europe, Avignon, where the Pope lived. Not even the most sacred place on the continent escaped. In Avignon lived one of the few men who tried to face the disease with method and not with prayer alone. The Pope's surgeon, Guy de Chauliac. As the plague ravaged the city, he studied, took notes, observed. Chauliac did something rare for his time. Instead of fleeing the problem, he set out to understand it. Chauliac described with precision the symptoms and the progress of the disease he called the Great Mortality. He even noticed that it took two forms, one slower, the other that spread through the air and killed within a few days. His records remain, to this day, one of the most valuable sources we have on the Black Death. He stayed, and he bore witness. The Pope himself, Clement VI, followed a curious piece of advice from his physicians. He took to sitting between two enormous roaring fires, day and night, believing the heat would purify the air around him. It may sound absurd today, but, by accident, the heat kept the fleas away. Understanding nothing of why, he ended up doing something that helped protect him. And Clement VI also did something genuinely courageous. When despair drove mobs to blame the Jews for the plague, accusing them of poisoning the wells, the Pope took a stand. He issued official documents defending the Jewish communities, stating that they too were dying of the disease and that they were innocent. It was a voice of reason in the midst of hysteria. Because the hysteria was terrible, unable to understand the disease, many people went looking for someone to blame. And the hatred fell, cowardly and tragic, upon minorities, above all upon the Jews. Entire communities were persecuted and destroyed in cities across Europe. The plague did not kill with disease alone. It killed through the fear and the prejudice it awoke. Extreme religious movements arose. The most famous was that of the Flagellants, groups of hooded men who marched from town to town whipping themselves in public, believing that voluntary suffering would soothe the wrath of God. They chanted, they bled, and they moved on. And without knowing it, they helped spread the plague wherever they went. Cities tried to defend themselves however they could. One common practice was fire. Entire squares became giant bonfires, burning the clothing, mattresses, and furniture of the dead, in the hope of burning the disease along with them. At night, the silhouettes of people gathered around the flames. It was despair organized into ritual. No one knew, of course, that the true villain was too small to be seen. The flea, hidden in the fur of the rats. While people burned clothes and prayed, the real vector of the disease simply slipped out the back door, leapt to the next rat, and began the cycle again. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't even see. But amid all that ignorance, some cities began to get it right through observation. Venice, one of the great commercial powers of the world, made a hard decision: closed the port. It began to turn away suspect ships with armed guards on the docks. They didn't know the exact reason, but they had noticed a pattern. The ships brought death. And it was in a small walled city on the Adriatic that one of the most important ideas in the history of public health was born. In 1377, the city of Ragusa, today's Dubrovnik, in Croatia, created an unprecedented law. Every ship or traveler arriving from a plague-stricken area had to wait in isolation for a set period of time before entering. It was the first quarantine in history. This is the Palace of the Popes in Avignon, which you can still visit today. It was the center of Christian power during the plague, the place from which Clement VI tried, with bonfires and decrees, to confront a force no one understood. The stones still stand. The people of that time do not. It's the kind of place where history leans, quite literally, against the wall. The physicians of the age did what they could with what they had. They read the ancient Greek and Arab masters, Galen and Avicenna, by candlelight, searching for answers those books did not hold. Science was still 6 centuries away from finding the cause of the disease. There was courage and dedication, yes, but against the Black Death, the knowledge of the time was all but powerless. In villages across Europe, the only sound left was the church bell, tolling for the dead at dawn. In many places, it rang so many times that people begged for it to stop, because the constant sound of death was unbearable. The silence that followed was, in its own way, even worse. The churches, which had always been the center of community life, stood empty. Deserted pews, silent confessionals, light falling through the stained glass onto a space with no one in it. A huge part of the population lost their faith that religion could protect them. Others clung to it even harder. The plague divided souls, and the clergy paid a very high price. It was the priests, after all, who stayed beside the sick and the dying, giving the last rites. And so they fell ill in great numbers. It's estimated that in some regions, as many as 40% of parish priests died. They did their duty, and many died doing it. When the first great wave finally passed, around 1351, Europe was a different place. In England, whole villages were simply abandoned. Fields that had once fed entire hamlets grew over with weeds. Empty stone houses, a single cross in a graveyard reclaimed by grass. In many places, nature quietly began to take back what had belonged to people. And here the story takes a surprising turn. With so many dead, there was suddenly not enough labor to work the land. And for the first time in centuries, the peasant who survived discovered that his work had value. There were few hands and much land. The simplest law of economics stepped onto the stage, and it was about to change the world. Before the plague, a peasant was all but bound to his lord's land, with almost no rights. After it, with workers scarce, he could negotiate. He could demand better wages. He could leave for another estate. The great feudal lords, grudgingly, had to give ground. The old feudal system, 1,000 years in the making, began to crack. That tension exploded just a few decades later. In 1381, English peasants rose up in a mass revolt, marching on London, led by figures like Wat Tyler and the preacher John Ball. It was one of the first great popular uprisings in European history, and it was, at its root, a late aftershock of the Black Death. Those who survived would no longer accept living as they had before. Little by little, the cities rose again. In the 1360s, masons went back to carving stone, the craftsmen's guilds reappeared, trade resumed. But it was a different world. A world that had looked death in the face, on the scale of millions, and now valued life, the individual, and the present in an entirely new way. In the monasteries, monks recorded for the future what had happened. The plague of 1348, they wrote in their chronicles by the light of oil lamps. Thanks to those patient records, and to the letters and books of people like Boccaccio and Chauliac, we know today, in detail, what those people lived through. They made certain they would not be forgotten. It's impossible to look at that period without feeling the weight of the number. It's estimated that the Black Death killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people worldwide. In Europe, between a third and half of the entire population in just a few years. No war, no natural disaster in history has ever come close. The great cathedrals still stood tall above emptier streets. And Europe, slowly, began to recover its colors. A new generation was born on a continent with half its people, and, strangely, with more resources per head, more land, more opportunity. Out of the void left by death, something unexpected began to grow. One of the strangest reactions came in the form of celebration. After so much mourning, many survivors plunged into an almost wild vitality, dancing, feasting, spending, living intensely, like people who had understood that life is far too short. There was born a new sensibility about death and about the sheer pleasure of simply being alive. From that awareness grew a striking artistic tradition, the dance of death, the danse macabre. In murals across Europe, artists painted skeletons leading kings, peasants, and popes in the same dance. The message was clear and revolutionary. Before death, all are equal. The rich man and the poor man end up in the same place. And from the ashes, something began to emerge that would change history, a new way of thinking. Less centered on God and the hereafter, more centered on the human being, on the here and now. Historians still debate how much the plague accelerated it. But it's hard to ignore. Not long after that catastrophe, Europe entered the Renaissance. This is a real image of a danse macabre mural, painted at the time. Look at the procession, skeletons leading people of every class. This art wasn't morbid for the sake of it. It was a way for a traumatized society to process what it had lived through, and to remember, forever, that death does not ask your title before it knocks. For centuries, no one knew what had caused it all. Physicians tried everything: rose water, herbal mixtures called theriac, powdered gemstones, honey. Nothing worked, because no one knew what they were fighting. It's humbling and human to think how many people died simply because science hadn't gotten there yet. It's from the era that followed that we get a famous image, the beaked mask of the plague doctor. That long beak was packed with fragrant herbs, because people believed that bad air caused the disease. In truth, it's a later invention, from outbreaks that came afterward. It became the visual symbol of the plague, but it protected against almost nothing. The plague would return to Europe again and again, in waves, over the centuries that followed. One of the last great outbreaks struck Marseille, in France, in 1720. Once more, walls, gates shut, quarantine. Humanity had learned to defend itself a little better, but it still did not truly know what it was that attacked it. The answer came only at the end of the 19th century. In 1894, during an outbreak in Hong Kong, a scientist finally placed the disease under the microscope and saw the culprit. After more than 500 years, humanity looked, for the first time, upon the face of the enemy that had emptied the medieval world. The enemy was a tiny bacterium, shaped like a rod. It was given the name Yersinia pestis, in honor of the scientist who identified it, Alexander Yersin. That small thing, invisible to the naked eye, had been, all by itself, the single greatest cause of death in human history. The monster that terrified the Middle Ages fit on the tip of a needle. More recently, science went further still. In modern laboratories, researchers managed to reconstruct the bacterium's DNA from the bones of medieval victims, buried for nearly 700 years. They confirmed, beyond any doubt, that it really was Yersinia pestis. The plague of the past, at last, confessed everything to the science of the present. Today we understand exactly how it spread, from rodent to flee, to person. A simple chain of 3 links that medieval Europe had no way of seeing. All that mortality, all that terror, came from something we now explain in a diagram that takes a few seconds. It's the abyss between not knowing and knowing. In London and other cities, modern archaeologists have excavated, with great respect, the great pits where victims were hastily buried. These sites, studied with scientific care, tell us in silence the scale of the disaster and give back, in a way, a measure of dignity and memory to those who were buried without a name. This is the real portrait of the one truly responsible, the bacterium Yersinia pestis, seen under the microscope. This is all it is. Not an army, not a divine punishment, not a curse. A microscopic organism that evolution armed and that human trade spread. To look at this image is to look at the thing that changed the course of all Western civilization. When you put the loss on a graph, the impact becomes visible. The population of cities like London collapsed between 1347 and 1349, and it took around 200 years to return to what it had been. 200 years. Generations upon generations lived in a world permanently marked by the absence of those the plague had taken. That's why, in many places, there are still memorials today. A candle lit in a niche of a medieval wall for the souls of 1348. It's a small gesture in the face of millions of anonymous dead, but it's the way we have of saying that those people existed, that they had names, families, dreams, and that we will not forget them. Historians today reopen the old church registers, those books of baptisms and burials, and read in them the true scale of the tragedy. Page after page of deaths, all in the same year. They are cold, precise documents that, read with attention, become the most honest portrait of what it was to live and to die during the Black Death. And there's a luminous irony at the end of it all. It was in that very Florence the plague had emptied that, only a few decades later, the Renaissance blossomed. Brunelleschi's dome, the great artists, an explosion of creativity. That new beginning was born, in part, from the brutal reset the disease imposed on the ancient world. Culture itself changed its face. The heavy, dark clothing of the Middle Ages gradually gave way to the color and lightness of the Renaissance. It was as if an entire continent, after years of mourning, decided to live again more intensely, more humanly, more colorfully. Pain had taught the value of life. A philosophy of death of its own even emerged. Books called The Art of Dying Well taught people to face the end with serenity and preparation. The Black Death had made death so present, so everyday, that culture had to invent ways of living alongside it. They learned to look head-on at what they feared most. Today, a researcher can stand before a great map of the plague spread across Europe and see patterns no one of that era could have seen. Where it advanced fastest, where it met resistance, which routes it followed. Modern epidemiology was born, in part, trying to understand exactly this kind of catastrophe. And when we compare, we notice something humbling. A doctor today, in full protective gear, does work not so different from that little 14th century physician in his beaked mask. The technology changed, the knowledge changed. But the courage to face an unknown disease in order to try to save lives is exactly the same. There's a recent discovery that is almost poetic. Genetic studies suggest the Black Death was so devastating that it literally shaped the immune system of Europeans. Those with certain genetic variations survived more often and passed those genes on. In other words, many people alive today carry, in their own bodies, a mark left by that catastrophe. Think about that for a second. The plague didn't stay only in the history books. It is, in a way, inside us. In the defensive genes we inherited from ancestors who, by pure luck or biology, managed to survive what killed half a continent. We are, in part, the descendants of those the Black Death could not take. In some places in Europe, there are ossuaries, small chapels built from the bones of plague victims, arranged as memorials. At first glance, it can seem disturbing, but the intention was the opposite, to remember, with respect, those who were lost, and to face the fragility of life head-on. They were places of reflection, not of horror. And here comes a detail many people don't know. the Black Death is not only the past. The bacterium Yersinia pestis still exists in the world today. Every year, a few thousand cases of plague are recorded in places like Madagascar, parts of Africa, and even the western United States. The difference is that now, with antibiotics, it is treatable. In other words, the monster that emptied the Middle Ages is still out there. It's just that humanity, after 700 years, has finally learned to face it. We learned about contagion, about quarantine, about hygiene, about science. Each of those lessons was paid for at a price that is almost impossible to imagine. Perhaps that is the deepest legacy of the Black Death. It brought down one world, the feudal, medieval world, bound to ancient certainties. And from the rubble, it helped raise another, more human, more curious, more scientific. The Gothic cathedrals and the domes of the Renaissance, side by side, tell that passage. 7 centuries of history in a single glance. We end in a real place, the Sedlec Ossuary, in Czechia, a memorial built in honor of the plague's victims. It exists so that we never forget what happened, neither the people who were lost, nor the lessons they left us. The Black Death was humanity's greatest tragedy, and also, without meaning to be, one of the great turning points of our history. If this story moved you, stay with us here on World in Stories, where history is told the way it deserves to be told.